Hi, and welcome back to Burst Mode Games. Today we have a 500-point combat patrol mission between Craftworld Eldar and the Tyranids. We are going to have 5 objectives during this match, and scoring is going to be primary scoring only. There will be 5 points for holding 1 objective, 10 points for holding 2 objectives, and then an additional 5 points if you hold more objectives than your opponent. Objectives will be maintained by each faction, so they can move away from those objectives once they've secured it at the end of their command phase. Deployment zones are going to look like such. They're 6 inches from the top and 6 inches from the bottom. Craftworld Eldar are going to be Team Orange, and the Tyranids are going to be Team Green for this match. Today, the Tyranids are coming under Hive Fleet Leviathan. That's going to give them their Synaptic Imperative, which means that any unit that is within 6 inches of a Synapse unit, which in this case is only going to be the Hive Tyrant, has a 6-up Feel No Pain, or an opportunity to roll 6 anytime there's a damage suffered, a wound suffered, and they can ignore it. For the headquarters, the Tyranids are going to be bringing a Hive Tyrant. This Hive Tyrant is coming with Adaptive Biology, which means that if it ever takes damage, after that phase for the rest of the battle, all damage is reduced by 1 to a minimum of 1 for the rest of the fight. He's also going to be bringing a Biomorphic Carapace, which means that basically all attacks against him, they'll be having to subtract 1 from the wound rolls. He also has a 4-up Invulnerable save, and he's taking 2 spells in addition to Smite, Catalyst for a 5-up Feel No Pain on a unit that he cast it on, and then Psychic Scream, which is basically another Smite. It does D3 wounds and has some extra effects if it hits an enemy Psyker. For the troops, the Tyranids are bringing 2 units of 5 Gene Stealers, and then a unit of 10 Hormagaunts. And then in the elite slot, the Tyranids are bringing 3 Hive Guard with the Impaler Cannons, which allow them to shoot out of line of sight up to 36 inches. For this match, the Craftworld Eldar are coming as a custom Craftworld. They're going to be Diviners of Fate, allowing everyone to have a 6-up Invulnerable save, and then they're also going to bring Expert Crafters, allowing a single reroll to hit and a single reroll to wound during each attack. For the headquarters, it's going to be the Spirit Seer, with the Warlord trait Seer of the Shifting Vector, allowing rerolling opportunities, and then bringing the relic Falchu's Wing to allow for a 12-inch movement and the Fly keyword. The Spirit Seer will also be bringing the spell Protect and Jinx. For the troop slot, the Eldar are going to be bringing 10 Guardians, armed with Shuriken Catapults. In the Elite slot, the Eldar are going to be bringing 5 Wraith Guard with Wraith Cannons. And then in the Heavy Support slot, the Eldar are going to be bringing a Wraith Lord with a Shuriken Cannon and a Star Cannon and 2 Shuriken Catapults, in addition to a War Walker with 2 Shuriken Cannons. This army is essentially the Eldar Start Collecting box with just 10 Guardians added to it. At the end of deployment, Craftworld Eldar are up on the northern portion of the map. They have their Guardians in the northwest, along with the Spirit Seer. They have the Wraith Lord kind of in the center, hoping to push towards the center objective and hold the middle ground, and the Wraith Guard off to the east, ready to apply some pressure to the Tyranids. The Tyranids, they use the line of sight blocking terrain down in the southeast to get set up, protect their Hive Guard, and hopefully be able to branch out and get some early charges on the Eldar. But that's the end of deployment. So after the roll-off, the Eldar were successful in getting the first turn, and we'll be moving into Craftworld Eldar, turn 1. At the end of the Craftworld's turn 1 movement and psychic phase, this is where we sit. The Guardians ended up moving southwest towards this objective, advancing, getting a number 2 to their advance roll, allowing them to move farther south. The Spirit Seer and the Wraith Lord moved towards the central objective. The Spirit Seer still owns that northern objective. Over here, the Wraith Guard advanced, getting a 3, allowing them to move south on this objective and get within range of some of the Tyranids down there in the southeast corner. There was an attempt for the Spirit Seer to cast Protect on the Wraith Guard, trying to get them a 2+ save. However, the Spirit Seer only rolled a 7, and because of the proximity to the Hive Tyrant, that ended up failing. Because the 7 is what's required, the Hive Tyrant adds a -1 modifier to the Spirit Seer's rolls, and the Craftworld Eldar decided not to spend a CP to re-roll that, And now we are moving into the Craftworld Eldar shooting phase. At the end of the Craftworld Eldar shooting phase, we started off over here with the Wraithguard, firing 2 eligible Wraithguard shots into the Hormagaunts. Both Wraithguard ended up missing with their Assault 1 weapons. The Wraithlord that was in range of the Hive Tyrant shot a Star Cannon and a Shuriken Cannon into him. Only 1 wound ended up getting through, and then the Hive Tyrant ended up shrugging it off with his save. There was no other additional eligible range targets, and then there's no one eligible for charges, or at least no charges that are going to occur. And that brings us to the end of Craftworld Eldar turn 1, moving in to the Tyranids turn 1. So at the conclusion of Tyranids' command phase, movement phase, and psychic phase, this is where we stand. In the command phase, the Tyranids went up to 4 command points and then moved on to the movement phase. The Hive Guard down here in the southeast corner did not move. They remained stationary. We had the 2 units of Gene Stealers, each advance, each only rolling a 1, moving towards the Wraith Guard and this easternmost objective. The Hormagaunts that were placed just north of the Hive Guard advanced, rolled a 2, and moved 10 inches towards the southernmost objective. However, they are still not in range. They failed to close the gap to within 3 inches. The Hive Tyrant moved north towards the center objective to get within charge range of the Wraithlord and the enemy Craftworld Spirit Seer. That concluded the movement phase for the Tyranids, and then we moved into the psychic phase. The Hive Tyrant initiated with Smite on the Wraithlord, rolling a 7, but then the Spirit Seer denied it with a natural roll of 11. The Hive Tyrant then casted Psychic Scream successfully on the Wraithlord, causing 3 more wounds and bringing the Wraithlord down to 7 wounds remaining. And so now we move into the Tyranids shooting phase. All right, at the end of the Tyranid shooting phase, the only Tyranid unit that fired was the Hive Guard. They shot their Impaler cannons into the Wraith Guard here, sitting on the easternmost objective. The first volley only did 2 wounds, bringing 1 Wraith Guard down to 1 wound. Then, using single-minded annihilation and spending 2 CP, bringing the Tyranids down to 2 CP remaining, they shot another volley and successfully did 4 wounds, killing the first one, and then also killing a second Wraith Guard. So now, that concludes the Tyranid shooting phase, moving on to the charge and fight phase. So the Tyranids all charged in. We have the Hive Tyrant rolling a 9 to get into contact with the Wraithlord. The first set of Gene Stealers rolled a 9, needing an 8, and got in contact with the Wraith Guard. And then the second unit of Gene Stealers rolled a 6 when they needed a 5, and also got in contact. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to pile these guys in, and then we're going to do the contacts, or I'm sorry, the combats, and we'll cover that right after this. At the end of the Tyranid fight phase, we started over here with the Hive Tyrant fighting into the Wraithlord. The Hive Tyrant was able to get 3 wounds knocked off the Wraithlord. At the end of all the Tyranids attacks, the Wraithlord swung back and was able to get 3 wounds off of the Hive Tyrant. Now, due to his adaptive biology, all future wounds that come his way will be reduced by 1 damage to a minimum of 1. Over here, the 10 Gene Stealers spread across those 2 squads of 5 attacked into the Wraith Guard, ending up killing 1 of them. 2 of them swung back and were able to kill 2 Gene Stealers out of 1 squad of 5 with both of their attacks. That concludes the Tyranid turn 1, moving into Craftworld turn 2. So at the end of the Craftworld movement phase, this is where we're at. Right at the beginning of the command phase, the Craftworlds went up to 4 CP. They had burnt 1 in the last fight phase to try to save one of these Wraith Guards, so I brought them down to 3, but they're back up to 4. And then at the beginning of the turn, the Craftworlds spent 2 CP on Tears of Isha to heal this Wraithlord 1d3 wounds. Ended up being 2, brought him back up to 6, and brought him back up to his top bracket. The next stratagem that the Eldar used was Feigned Retreat on the Wraithlord, allowing him to fall back and still allow him to shoot and charge this turn. The Guardians moved off of their objective to the west. They advanced, rolling a 1 and getting themselves onto the center objective with the Hive Tyrant. The Warwalker came in from using his scout vehicle ability and came in line of sight of the Hive Tyrant and 9 inches away from all enemy units. The Spear Seer moved away from that northern objective to be next to the Warwalker and within smite range of the Gene Stealers. So right now we're just going to knock out that Psychic phase. The Spear Seer is going to cast Smite on the Gene Stealers. Got a 6, that's enough. With a 5 and the -1 coming from the Hive Tyrant's ability. Hive Tyrant is going to attempt to deny that with an 8. So he does deny that Smite. So the Smite's not going to go off on the Gene Stealers. And that brings us to the shooting phase for the Craftworld Eldar. Craftworld Eldar finished their shooting. They started off with this Guardian blob, firing all their shuriken catapults into the Hive Tyrant, dealing several wounds. I think they dealt like 3. And then the Warwalker shot both of his shuriken cannons also into the Hive Tyrant. And then the Wraith Lord shot his Star Cannon, shuriken cannon, and his 2 shuriken catapults all into the Hive Tyrant, resulting in the Hive Tyrant going down to 4 wounds. That was the only shooting for this phase, so we'll be moving on into the Craftworld Eldar charge and fight phase. The only charge that occurred was the Wraith Lord into that lower portion of Gene Stealers right there. All I needed was like a 3. I ended up getting a 4, and is right in there in combat with both squads of Gene Stealers. Over here, Guardians decided to stay away from the Hive Tyrant, probably wise, and no other Craftworlds ended up charging in. So moving into the fights. Craftworld fight phase and turn 2 complete. The Wraith Lord swung in first, having been the individual that charged, ended up killing 2 Gene Stealers. All of the Gene Stealers swung back into the Wraith Guard, ended up killing one, which was really that right there. Ended up killing one of the Wraith Guard, and then the single Wraith Guard fought back and killed one of the Gene Stealers. So that brings us to the end of Craftworld Turn 2, moving into Tyranid Turn 2. All right, the Tyranids accomplished their command phase, movement phase, and psychic phase. So in the command phase, the Tyranids went up to 5 points for owning this objective. Remember, the Gene Stealers were over there having objective secured, so they were able to snag that one. The Hormagaunts were not near the southern objective, so that was the only objective the Tyranids have. So they got the 5 points for owning one to the Craftworld Eldar's 10 points that they earned last turn. So in the movement phase, the Hive Tyrant ended up moving east towards this Wraith Lord and Wraith Guard. The Gene Stealers fell back, moving south, kind of setting up a little bit of a wall. In the event that Wraith Lord and Wraith Guard survive, they can't get to the Hive Guard. The Hormagaunts moved forward, getting contact with both the southernmost objective and the central objective, and within charge range of the Guardian blob right there. In the Psychic phase, the Hive Tyrant casted Smite, targeting the Wraith Lord, rolled a 6, and then the Spear Seer denied it, rolling a 9. After that, the Hive Tyrant casted Psychic Scream on the Wraith Lord, successfully casting it and doing D3 mortal wounds. Ended up being 3 mortal wounds, bringing the Wraith Lord down to 3. And so that's where we stand at the end of the Tyranids Psychic phase, moving into Tyranid shooting. All right, in dramatic fashion, the Hive Guard shot 2 volleys using single-minded annihilation, both into the Wraith Lord, able only to do 2 wounds. And that was with 1d3 wounds they got through on the first volley. The second volley, a single wound did get through, but the Wraith Lord was able to save it with a 5-up save. All right, that moves us into the Tyranid charge and fight phase. So the charge rolls are complete. The Hive Tyrant got into base-to-base contact, well, at least an engagement range of the Wraith Lord, rolling a 7 on his charge, and then the Hormagaunts decided to commit to a charge against the Guardians, and they rolled a 9. So they were able to really get deep in there, kind of move around this front guy up along the north end, hoping that if they are successful, they'll get their special Hormagaunt 6-inch consolidation move, where they might be able to jump towards this Warwalker towards the other objective. But we'll see what happens in the Tyranid fight phase. Okay, fight phase complete. So the Hormagaunts came over here, They swung in. They were able to kill 5 Guardians with their Scything Talons. The Guardians fought back and were actually able to kill 3 of the Hormagaunts. So they're stuck in combat, and after we go through this, we'll knock out the Guardians. Combat roll morale check. So going into the Hive Tyrant, he did effectively kill the Wraith Lord and then consolidated into this Wraith Guard over here. So over here, the Guardians have a leadership of 7. They lost 5, so we need pretty much a 1. If we get a 2 or higher, they're gonna end up failing. So got a 5, so they ended up failing. So the first guy will run away, and then we need to see if the remaining 4 run away. So 1s, they take off. So no 1s, so we'll just end up losing 1 of these Guardians. Okay, so moving on into Craftworld, turn 3. At the end of the Craftworld movement phase, the Guardians stayed in place. Going to end up fighting these Hormagaunts over this objective. The Spear Seer and Warwalker moved south towards this eastern objective, and then this Wraith Guard fell back onto that objective, and Wraith Guards can still shoot after they fall back. So in the command phase, though, they did go up to 1 point CP, and then they did score 10 points for owning 2 objectives. They don't technically own more than the Tyranids. The Tyranids control this one. It'll turn green in the next phase if nothing changes, or their next turn if nothing changes. And then, of course, the Tyranids have this one secured. So technically it was 2-on-2 objectives, so that brings the Eldar's point total to 20 victory points, to the Tyranids 5. So now we're going to go into the Psychic phase. We'll probably just knock out Smite right now from the Spirit Seer into the Hive Tyrant. We're going to need at least a 6 on the dice to the Hive Tyrant's ability. So that's an 8. The Hive Tyrant's going to go ahead and try to deny that. Did not with a 4. And so that's going to be 1d3 wounds to the Hive Tyrant with 3. So that's going to be 3 mortal wounds. So his ability is not going to be able to save him on that. And that's going to bring him down to 1, concluding our Psychic phase and moving us in to the Craftworld shooting phase. At the end of the Craftworld's turn 3 shooting phase, the Wraith Guard ended up shooting his Wraith Cannon into the Swarmlord without any effect. Swarmlord ended up saving on the Invulnerable save, and then the Warwalker shot all 6 shots from his Shuriken Cannons into him without any effect. The Hive Tyrant ended up saving all of the wounds that did get through. I think it was like 2. And so that left the only other gun available being the Spear Seer's pistol. And the Spear Seer rolled a 3, got the hit, rolled a 6 on the wound, got the -3 AP, and then the Hive Tyrant only rolled a 2 on his 4-up invuln save, taking off that final wound and bringing down the Tyranids Warlord. So that's the conclusion of the Craftworld's shooting phase. Moving on into the fight phase, charge and fight phase. At the end of the Craftworld fight phase, the Hormagaunts ended up fighting first, as they were locked in combat, ended up killing 1 more Guardian, leading them to 3. They do have leadership of 6, though, so they're okay on doing a morale check. The Guardians fought back, ended up killing 2 of the Hormagaunts, and now there is no more Synapse creatures on the board, so they're going to have to take a morale check. And they have a leadership of 5, and so basically a 4 or higher will do a combat attrition. We got a 2, so the Termagants are fine and they are not going to have any morale issues. Those are the only charges or fights that occurred during turn 3 Craftworlds. So moving on to turn 3 Tyranids. So for the command phase of turn 3 for the Tyranids, they only ended up owning 1 objective, getting them 5 points, bringing them up to a total of 10 to the Craftworld's 20. The Hormagaunts ended up holding what they had, and then the Gene Stealer squad over here moved north from their location up towards the Warwalker and the Wraith Guard. Over here, Hive Guard remains stationary, and we don't have any Psychic, and so we are now moving into the Tyranid shooting phase, turn 3. Shooting phase complete. The Hive Guard ended up shooting 1 volley into the Wraith Guard. They did not suffer any penalties, as that is the nearest eligible target for the Hive Guard. And they do have, I think, a little bit of line of sight just peeking around that corner. That is all the shooting for the Tyranids. Moving on into the Tyranid charging and fight phase. During the charges, the Gene Stealers charged both the Warwalker and the Wraith Guard. They rolled a 10. They had plenty of room to move around with. The Spirit Seer decided not to heroically intervene, is just going to remain behind that Warwalker. That completes the charges. We're going to be starting off with the Guardians fighting over here as they were locked in combat and ready to hit the Hormagaunts. And then we'll move into the Gene Stealers and resolve the rest of the fights in the fight phase. At the conclusion of the Tyranid fight phase, the Gene Stealers ended up killing the Wraith Guard and then did no wounds to the Warwalker, and the Warwalker did no wounds to the Gene Stealers. So the Gene Stealers are still unscathed. We're able to take out that Wraith Guard. Over here, the Guardians swung at the Hormagaunts, ended up killing 3 of them, and then the Hormagaunts swung back and killed 1 Guardian. So the Hormagaunts are at risk of failing morale. They need lower than a 3. So a 3 or higher is going to fail their morale test. And they got a 1. All right, so they're there, they're good, and that is contesting that objective. Okay, so that is the end of the Tyranids turn 3, moving into Craftworld's turn 4. Craftworld's turn 4, the command phase brought them up to 2 command points. They earned 15 points for having these 2 objectives, which was 10, and then more than the Tyranids. The Guardians were here contesting that one, which meant it belonged to nobody. And then the Tyranids have not secured this one, but they technically own this one. So they have 1. The Craftworld have 2. So 15 points for the Craftworld, bringing their points up to 35, to the Tyranids 10. The Guardians then in the movement phase used Feign Retreat to move south 7 inches, putting them in range of this southern objective, and also within range of shuriken fire, allowing them to fire after having fallen back. And then the Spirit Seer moved just a little bit towards the center to be within range of the Hormagaunts with his pistol in the event they aren't cleaned up by the Guardians. And that completes the movement phase. For the Psychic phase, the Spirit Seer here ended up casting Smite successfully, ended up killing 3 of the remaining 5 Gene Stealers. That concludes the Craftworlds all the way up to the shooting phase. Moving on to the shooting phase. At the end of Craftworld's shooting phase 4, or turn 4 shooting phase, they ended up killing the Hormagaunts over here with the 2 Guardians firing 4 rounds from their shuriken catapults. Over here with the Warwalker shooting into combat at a -1 modifier. His shuriken cannons were still able to make quick work of the 2 Gene Stealers that were there. And that brings us to the conclusion of the Craftworld's turn 4, moving into Tyranids turn 4. Okay, so Tyranids turn 4, at the beginning in the command phase, they earned 0 points for owning any objectives. So the point value was still 35 to 10 in Craftworld's favor. They did get a CP, a CP, bringing them up to 2. In the Psychic phase, there was no Psychic. In the movement phase, the Hive Guard did shift forward 5 inches to bring them closer to objectives in a mad dash hopes they might be able to get one by the end of the game. They did shoot twice using single-minded annihilation into the Warwalker that was there, just barely killing it. And that was with using their -1 penalty to hit because they moved with a heavy weapon. And so that's the conclusion of Tyranid turn 4, moving into Craftworld's turn 5. So we went through the command phase for Craftworlds. They earned 1 CP. They also earned 15 victory points, bringing them up to a total of 50 to the Tyranids 10. And then movement, Spirit Seer moved up just to make sure his pistol was in range of all of the Hive Guard. The Guardians moved up with the same idea, making sure their shuriken catapults could reach all the Hive Guard. In the Psychic phase, the Spirit Seer casted Smite, ended up doing 3 mortal wounds and knocking off 1 of these Hive Guard, moving into the Craftworld's shooting phase. At the end of the Craftworld shooting phase, the Guardians were unable to affect any wounds on to the Hive Guard. However, the Spirit Seer still with his pistol that seems to be doing well was able to knock off 1 wound of one of the Hive Guard. This will complete the Craftworld's turn 5. There's really no point in going into the Tyranids turn 5. They might be able to kill the Guardians or even maybe the Spirit Seer, but they're not going to be able to score any points. So that brings us to a final score of Craftworld winning with 50 points to Tyranids 10.